When we did the difference between the absolute reference and relative reference, and we use that example to build with one formula how we can build a multiplication table, correct? So we said this should be this row, and this we have to fix the A, right? It's always column A times the row, and B there can vary because the blue goes from left to right, but the number 1 is the fixed one. So this formula is pretty much universal. I can apply it and go down, right? So we're going to use the same logic kind of, and to rebuild this table with a for loop. So we're going to create a logic that's going to scan through this table, and for every one it's going to get the number from here, the row, and the number on top of the column, and put the multiplication here. So this way, think about it. This is how you have set of data. You go through the rows one after the other, and every row you have to scan from the first column to the last row. And at that point, you can do whatever analysis you want. You want to check, you can do anything. So how would the logic would work? So we can start simple for so So what's the range for the first, for the rows? It's from 2 to 11, right? Row 2 to row 11. For R, I'm going to name it R just to know this is the index for the row, equal 2 to 11. What do I close it with? Next R. Okay. So let's start at least with the first one, just with column B. R is the variable. No, the one you put in the counter, this is all what you need to do to declare it.
You don't need to write it down.
No, if you're using the while, if you need a counter with the while group, yes, you need to. But the for, that's all what you need, because as soon as you identify, as long as it's not used before or is not used for other purpose. So you don't have a variable R you're using for something else, and now you're going to use it for this. This should be unique within that sub, within this macro.
It's called for?
This variable?
No, like this kind of like.
This is for loop.
Full loop.
Yeah. So I'm going to create a logic. So as this goes from row 2 to 11, let's fill the data in row B, right? So my target cell is, use a range, B what? As I go, B and R, correct? So we start with B2, then B3, then B4, then B5, until B11. That's the value. So I'm going to assign so this value should be the multiplication of the first cell in row R and the first one in the column. So how can I refer to this one? To number 1 here. Range of what? A and R. That value times now how can I refer to the one on top? To B1. B1. Okay, there's no variable that tells me the column yet. Because no matter which cell I am on here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm always multiplying the one next to it by the one on top. This is fixed. Now the next step will make this variable, and we'll go through it. So I'm doing step by step. Let me make the font a bit smaller. Okay. So if I run this, go step into F8. So R equal 2 now. So this is B2 will equals the value of A2, which is 1, times the value of B1, which is 1. The second one, done. So if I want to do it for all the columns, I have to take this, copy it, and do the same for the second one. Instead of B, I will do C, correct? And this always multiplying by the column A is the one I multiply with. So instead of B, I do C. Yeah.
How can you not do R plus 1 like you do in the other ones?
Because the for loop automatically increases as soon as you do next R, the for automatically will do the increase of count by 1 automatically. So this is what's kind of easy about the for loop. You don't need to declare the counter, you don't need to initialize it, and you don't need to increase it manually. Okay. So if I delete this, let's do it again. So we'll do B and C. See how is it doing? One after the other.
You're in the sheet, not the module, right?
This is the module.
It's the module?
Yes.
How does it know the sheet?
Is the active sheet, the one you have it active. So by default, you don't specify the sheet will run on whatever sheet is active.
But if you did it in sheet, then it will still run, right?
Yeah, if you specify the sheet, then it doesn't matter which one it's active, it's gonna run.
Yeah, if you wrote the code in specific like sheet 5, so it will only run in sheet 5.
If you put it here in sheet 5, yes, it's only run there. But I don't recommend actually putting code in the sheet. Macro is kind of okay if you have a macro specific to that sheet, but functions, just put the function module, so you can access them from any sheet.
But this is a macro, right?
This is a macro, yes.
After the multiplication sign, did you use underscore to carry the function to the next line?
After
The multiplication sign?
yes. So in some, basically, if you don't want to, if you not break your statement in 2 lines, you use the underscore. So Excel will consider this as 1 line. Just this is for readability. It doesn't impact how Excel process. So for you to see it, if you have a long formula, you can break it in half, use an underscore, and continue the second line.
So will it run the same if you get rid of it?
Yes. If you if you delete it and make it on the same line. Oops, hold on. So
That would run the same even.
so you'll do this. So this is now, it doesn't look long, but if you just do enter, it's not going to complain because it's not going to consider that this is part of that. To make it consider, you have to add underscore, and then it will not complain. Then this will be continuous.
So what this is doing is it is incrementing A and multiplying it every time you see.
What this is doing basically, let me just go over this again. So as R changes from 2 to 11, is multiplying the cell in column A associated to that row with the top cell in column B with the one right above it. So, but this is now for 2. If we have 10, we have to do this 10 times. Well, if you have 100, what do you have? 500. So instead of having this, hold on, let's do it quickly. C, D, and E. Just show the repetition. This is E and this is D. So let's run it, and just to your point, let's make sure we're on the right sheet. This is sheet 5. Activate. So we'll make sure that we're on sheet 5 before we run it. Okay. So if you run it again, let me delete these. This will do B, will fill B2, and then C2, D2, and E2. After that, go B3, now R is 3, B3, C3, D3, and E3, and so on. So, but this is only for 4. Now, if I need to complete the 10, I need to do this for everyone. So let's take another approach to this one. Instead of doing it this way, so what's changing here from one to another? B, C, D, which means the column index. So the column goes from, if you want to go by numbers, from 2 to 11, same thing. So let's make this a variable. So this becomes a variable, and this becomes a variable. And this, the whole thing will be a few lines. So let's see how that looks like. It's look like this, called multiplication. So you have two for loops. For r equal 2 to 11, let me remove this. So this will go through the rows. So on every row, we have another variable column, go from 2 to 11. For this one, since I'm using the numbers, the index of the column, index of the row, is easier to use the cell rather than the range. Because the cells function takes row index and column index. So I don't have to translate to the column from 2 to B, and 3 is C, and 4 is D, and so on, to use the range. I can simply just use the cell. So when I start with the first one, 2, 2, so cell 2, 2, which is B2, will equal R1, which is, this is column A, which is the green area, the green column, and cell 1C, which is row 1 in column C. So that will go through this, and the other one will change like this. So if I run this one, this multiplication, it will do it. So the reason why you would need to do that, and we'll see another function where we use, instead of using formula, you use a macro. If you have a data set, let's say 100,000 records, and you have one column, let's calculate a column. You put a formula in it. What Excel does, every time you make any action, you double click on cell, you edit cell, Excel recalculates every single formula on the whole workbook. And if you have a lot of data, this becomes really slow. So if you know your formula, your data is static, and your formula will never produce another result. So to manually do it, you can create the formula, get the data, you do copy paste as value. That's it. It doesn't recalculate anymore. But other way to do it is to create a macro that runs through it and put the results there. So it doesn't get recalculate every time you save the sheet. You'd notice from some of the samples you opened from previous projects, some of them are pretty slow. And when you hit save, you see it's kind of takes time. The reason it takes time to save, not because it's a big file, but also every time you save, Excel recalculates all the formula one last time. So if your file is slow to work with because of formula recalculation, so this is one way to reduce that. If you have a formula that will never produce another result, I strongly recommend you calculate it once and put the value there, or use a macro to do that. Also, another trick, under formulas, you have calculation options. By default, it's automatic. You can change that to manual. So in this case, the formulas will not recalculate until you force it to. Give you an example. Let's say some of these we did here. This equals times B1, right? And 1 is fixed. So see what happens here. Shows me 1. Because it didn't calculate the formula. Because I set the formula calculation to manual. When I force calculate, basically, when you say calculate, This is F9, and this is, if you notice also when I do the random between to refresh, I press F9. It recalculates it again. So I press F9, then it calculates the formula and updates it. Now you don't see any effect, but you have tons of data, tens of thousands, you'll see the difference. So this is how you get around it. You work with Excel more efficient, even if you have a lot. Okay. So yeah, difference between this having a formula versus static value. Static value makes Excel faster. Okay. So this is the nested for. This is how it works. You have a for loop within a for loop. Yes.
So here we use the cells value.
Right.
If we want to use the range and use like A, B, C, D, is there a way to convert that A to 1, B to instead of, because here also we'll at least have to convert it. If we are using the cells type, we'll have to at first convert or keep in mind that say AA is my 27th, AB is 28th. And then
Let me ask you this. Let's say you want to do this. How do you know, if you want to use the index to go through columns, how do you know what's the column range? What's the index of the column? Let's say I want to do some work on range from M to U. How do I know what's the column range? The index for that.
we'll have to translate it into numeric.
How do you do that? You go back and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? What if you're talking about BL to BP? No. So there's a formula here called column, tells you what's the column number. This is column 64. So this is how you know. Row index is easy because just look on the side. Even though with that there is a function called row. Gives you the row number of the existing cell. You still can use that actually to use a row number of another reference. Tells the row of that specific cell. But if you don't specify the cell, it will give you the row of where the formula is. So use this column function if you want to run any loop between two sets of columns. So this makes it slightly easier.
Can you go back to the function?
Sure.
Why did you define I?
There was another piece of code here that I didn't use. For this one, actually, I don't need that. Because this function basically evolved from more manual to this, so you don't need these. So this will be the final.
Knows what R and C is?
Yes.
Sub is multiplication.
Subname is multiplication. Also, I think because I have it assigned to a macro here, let me delete this one. Actually, you know what? Leave it. So here, because I have this button, if I right click on it, do assign macro, it already has the function multiplication assigned to it. So I don't have to go to the code, I can just click the button and it will run it. Okay. Okay. So if you go through the logic again, so I have one variable R for every value, this way to look at it, for every value of R, C goes from 2 to 11. So R equal 1, then C goes from 1 to 11. Then R equals 2, then C goes 1 to 11. So this for loop, the C goes through all the values from 2 to 11 within one cycle of the R loop. So for every value of R, C changes from 2 to 11, then R increases, then G changes go also from 2 to 11. So at every value here, every point within this loop, you can use R and C to refer to that cell specifically, and then use that value to check something or assign a value there. Any question? Okay. So we've seen this example before, how we used functions to create to assign taxes, right? So here how you call, when we call this tax function with the input from income. Now let's see how we can use this function, but you notice the difference between this cell and this cell, G and B, is that the column G has static numbers, correct? Versus column B has the formula. So we're going to see how we can use this function, call it from a macro to fill the values here. And this is what I was referring to just a minute ago. If you have hundreds of thousands of records, a familiar record, instead of using this, use this. Your Excel sheet will be much faster and performs better if you have the value static, because you know in your data the income is not changing. So it's not like if you added more data, this will change. That's it. This is static, and this is something to build on. So the function we saw last time is called function. We have simple tax, right, and IRS tax. So simple tax takes income as input. And as you noted, there is no reference to any cell or sheet or range. It's absolute. So let's see how we can use it in another macro. So create a macro called fill simple tax. We start with, why is it? Oh, here we go. So we have sheet 3, which is one sheet to activate. And then how many columns do I have? 15. From 2 to 15. How many rows, I mean? So I'm putting the target, I'm filling the data in column G. Instead of cells, let's use range here, it's easier. Range G and what? And I. And also let's use R for row, it's easier. So the value in column G equals, here we can just simply use the function name. Just type in the value of that. Let me actually delete it, start over. Equal simple tax. You know what I did? Because I did simple and I pressed control space. If I do, let me do SI, control space gives me other option. So as soon as I type SIM, Excel gives me matching keywords in the system, including the functions I created. So, and then I hit tab, gives me simple tax, and open parentheses, it tells me what I need to provide as input. So what is the input in this case? Where's the income tax coming from? Which column? A and the same row, correct? Row R. Value, not validation. So look at this. Is it clear? So I took the value from range A, R, so we start with A2. Pass it to the simple tax function to return the value and put it in the column G2. So this will do column G2, G3, G4 until G15. And then the value will be just the output of the function. So what happened in this case, the difference between this way and using the formula directly is, for whatever reason you change your function, you have to go back. The G column will not get updated. You have to go back and run the script again. if let's say the percentage changes or the output of this function changes, you need to run this again. So this is a live dynamic value. This is a static value. So let's run it and see how that works. Next R, because I renamed it. So R initially equals to 2. G2 is empty. And A2 is 728,000. It goes through simple tax. You notice if you do this as you step in, it's going to take you to the function where income now it passes the value to run it, to return the tax. I was going to throw it one after the other. So you notice it's putting it there. I'm going to run it all.
They have to be on the same module function.
Functions, yes. I strongly recommend always keep it in module.
Especially in the same module.
You can put it in the same module.
Okay.
But just for organization reason, I spread the functions and macros between two modules.
Okay.
So this is the module. This is my function library. Leave it separate from the other code. To Excel doesn't make a difference. You can have every function in a separate module, have all cramped in one. There's no difference. So if you put a function in a different module, it still means you cannot have two functions with the same name, even if they're in separate modules, as long as they're in the same file. So this is how you can use a function. Same thing like you use in the formula bar. You need to use it and pass the value. Okay. Same thing with the other function. I'm not going to go over it again, but.
What if you had one of the examples where it's like you multiply it by 5% if it's less than a certain amount, and like 10%, like basically like an if and then?
Same. It's the same function. Just call that function, and then the logic is within that function. No, you can do it like within the for loop here. You can do that. Let's say if the range, if the value within certain. Hold on, let me create a copy of this. Simple tax, call it 0. So you don't have to use a function if you don't have one. You can always check. Let's say if the value of income is less than 50,000, then you can use simple tax. Otherwise, you can use IRAS tax. You can put whatever logic you want here. You don't even have to use a function if you want to just say this equals range A times 0.15. Otherwise, will be another value. Put end if. So the way also I would consider this, if you have this cell that you reference it a couple of times, I'd rather put this in a variable. It's called income as double. For every value, every time you start a new row, you put income equals the value in column A, and then instead of this, you check for income. This is easier to read. Still technically exactly the same, but instead of always writing this, you put this in a placeholder income, and then you just check against it. Yeah, within the for loop, you can put any logic you want. But the only thing you need to know is between these two lines, R has one value. Starting with the initial value, and it increases with every cycle. But there's no reason why you can't put any logic there to check. Any question? So the next topic is like a couple of small things. Showed you this last time, the scroll bar. So this is a good example of where we can use a scroll bar. Let's say you have different values you want to test with loan calculator between number of years, the interest, and the loan amount. How you can quickly navigate between different values. So we create scroll bars. See, it's easy. Or you can hold this, change this here, move this up, move this down, see what you got. So how does this work? It's easy. No, seriously, this is one of the easiest things because straightforward. So it might be on the exam. So let me delete this and start from scratch. So go under developer, insert. Where is it? Yeah, scroll bar. Yes.
Is this file on Blackboard?
Yes, it is. So you insert scroll bar. At this point, scroll bar is not linked to anything. So you do properties. You right click, format control. So it's straightforward. What's the minimum value? What's the maximum value? Incremental change and page change. Incremental change means every time you press on the arrows left and right, how much should this value increase by? The page change, just like on your regular scroll bar, sometimes because you click here, right? Or sometimes you click on this empty space here. This is the page change. So, and here we define the parameters. So this has to be linked to cell, see, linked to cell B3, the amount, minimum value, based on our requirements, the loan value, the minimum value is 3,000. Maximum value is 30,000. And incremental change by 1,000. So every time you click the button, the amount increase or decrease by 1,000. And the page change, I decided is like 2,500. That's it. Now you have this control is linked to this cell. So every time you change it, you click it, the value changes in that cell. Up to 30,000. I click in the middle, see it goes down by 2,500. That's all it does. It's just an extension to, instead of typing the numbers, it just, you can use something with the mouse. You can navigate left and right.
What did you put 25 for? What was that?
The page change, which is basically when to move this scroll bar, right? You have to either click the button on the end, the arrow, or in between here. This is the page change.
Oh, okay.
This is like a bigger step. The only trick here is that the number, these are all integers or whole numbers, no decimals. You cannot put, say, this is go from 0 to 1 with a step of 0.01. So this is where the other example here of the interest. How are you going to do it for the interest? It works for the dollar amount, works for the years. How are you going to do the interest? So if we look how we did the interest, it links to D4, which is the cell behind it. And put it here. So D3 is actually D4 divided by 1,000. So I need the change, hold on. So the interest has to go between 0 to 15%, correct? How do I translate this here? So this goes from 0 to 150 with the one increment. So if we divide by 1,000, that makes the range from 0 to 0.15. So this allows me to have an increase of 0.05 every time I change it. See, it goes 25, that's 2.5, 30, 35, 50. So this number, this scroll bar, control the cell goes from 0 to 150. And then simply I divide this by 1,000. This will give me the interest. And then I use this in my payment formula. So this is how you need to have like an intermediate cell when you need to use a scroll bar to control a number with a decimal. Years the same like amount. From 3 to 30 years, incremental 1, page changes 2, and link cell. Don't tell me this is not simple. You have a question at the exam?
The only question.
Maybe. So this is really cool tool when you have some formulas, you want to play with different numbers, have different variables instead of like keeping typing this and that. So you change it, and you see how that changes. Okay. Another one now with the VBA. If you notice when you right click on it, you can assign a macro. So with the button, the event on the button is basically called on click. So when you click the button, something happens, which is a macro. You assign a macro when you click a button. Here, there's no button to click. So you can assign a macro to execute every time you change the value. So you notice when you assign a macro, by default, the event called change. So every time the value changes, you can execute a macro. And that can use the new value. So instead of doing refresh. An example of that is the color selector here, when I showed you last time. So every time I change this, the color changes. The reason is there's a macro behind it called set color. Let's see how that works. So this is F2, even though it's a merged cell, by the way, if you notice. Initially you have 3 cells, you can merge them. And that will take the address, the ID of the top one. So the way you know what's the address of the merged cell, you highlight it and you look up here. This is F2, even if it's a merge of multiple ones. So the code says the color of F2, range F2, I call the RGB function, where I need to provide the red. The red is provided from where? From A2. And the green is provided by A3, and the blue is provided by A4. So every time I change any of these 3, I have all these 3 assigned to the same macro. So any of them, any change of these 3 will trigger the same macro. It's okay to have one macro assigned to multiple buttons. You can have 3 buttons, they all trigger the same macro. Nothing wrong with that. So every time any change of these 3 scroll bars, it will trigger an execution of this. So every scroll bar is basically linked, the red one is linked to A2 with the value from 0 to 255 for an increment of 1. So every time you change a value, you change the scroll bar, it will change the value in A, it will update the color in F2. So if you do right click on any of these, they're all assigned to one macro called set color. Is this clear how this works? Let's go backwards. So the color of this assigned by the macro, reading the red, green, blue values from A2, A3, and A4. And these can be either controlled manually, by the way, you can just type it, put 200. So if you type it, put 200, nothing's changed because nothing triggers the macro. I can put 0 here and nothing changed because the macro didn't run. I can either run it manually, or if I change this value from here, then it will update. So I can type this manually 0, and I do what? I click set color because I have this button also assigned to the same macro. So I can either manually do it, put 0 here and 0 here, and put set color. And you notice as you change, the scroll bar will automatically adjust to the new value. So if I put this to 55, You notice the middle one is going to go all the way to the right. And then I do set color. Is the sequence understood? Do I need to repeat it? Is it clear how every piece is linked to another? Okay. Okay. So this is also on Blackboard. So on the form control, there are also other checkboxes. Hold on. Why is it design mode? There are different controls I'm not going to go over, but you can use checkboxes, you can use drop-down list, you can have groupings. I've seen people back in the days create a whole user interface just like any Windows application with like text boxes, radio boxes, and do a lot of data manipulation. So you can build a lot of stuff with it without no much programming. But I'm not going to go over them. Just there's one other piece if you want to use. This is instead of scroll bar, this is actually a spin button. Same thing. You can link it to a specific cell. Let's say B3. Same thing with 0 to 1000. Incremental change of, let's say, 1000. The only difference between this and the scroll bar, it doesn't have page change. So it's just like a trimmed down version of scroll bar. So just up and down. You cannot move at faster pace, just one step at a time. Okay. Any question on that? On the scroll bars? Okay. So scroll bars is a link to a cell. You change it, will update the value in the cell, and vice versa. You update the value in the cell, it's going to change the position of the scroll bar. Okay. So Sparklines. Cool little charts. So we take this simple data set. So this is figures from like different industries at different dates. Information. Under information technology, you have software, hardware, media, telecom. Under services, you have healthcare, consumer, business, and financials. So how much the revenue went from quarter to quarter over 4 years. So without going like full-blown chart, how can you present this in some type of graphics? Maybe did it late. Clear content. Why isn't it doing it? Okay. So in charts, there is something called Sparklines. This section here, between lines, columns, win-loss. It's pretty cool. So let's say I want to insert a line, select the data range. And the location, the sparkline is in a specific cell. You notice the chart doesn't belong to a cell. The sparklines is stuck within a specific cell. So this gives me a representation of the data within this column. So you notice it changes with the cell. Down, you can link to a column, and to make it propagate, just do it for one column, apply to the others. If you notice also when you click it, hold on, let me stick to one. Zoom in a little bit. When you highlight it, you get another tab on top called Sparkline Design. You have multiple options. You can highlight the high points, high point and low point. So if you want to highlight those, you can simply just use markers. This is every single data point. You can put in a column, win-loss. If you have positive or negative value, you want to use win-loss. You can put in a column chart or line.
I
Yes.
don't know the axis. Like for this one, it's assuming that's the x.
Yeah, it's just Y. There's no X.
Just y. So what is
This
y?
is equivalent to a line chart. So we can insert line chart. You notice it's just data point 1 to data point 16. Doesn't matter what it's not the date.
Gotcha.
So if I change, for example, this axis to set the minimum to, what is it, 12,000 up to, you notice, looks the same. But you don't have to go create a chart for that. Sparkline will give you exact same figure. And imagine if you need to do the same for every single sector. So I see this actually is really neat and a good way to display the data. The other way, if we did the conditional formatting, let me clear the rules. So also to see with the color scale how the value changed within this every same service. So you highlight just one sector, not the whole thing, just one. And you apply a color scale. We can use this one. And then you can copy it or not copy it. You can just click the format, copy the format painter, and just apply it to every, hold on, copy painter, double click it so it's always active. Yeah, if you highlighted all, it takes them all as one. Yeah. So the color scale, keep in mind, this is only within same column, so don't compare this to the other one. So it gives you at least within each sector, it started high and went low, and you can see that in the graph. Okay, or this opposite was really low and went a little bit high, so you can see it here. So the color scale also is reflected in the graph. Any question on this? Yes, John.
If you were to filter it, say like you did one of them by like lowest to highest, will all the charts change, or you have to, or it doesn't do it automatically?
If you sort it?
Yeah, if you sort it.
Let's check that. Because right now they sort it by date, so it's a chronological
Yeah.
order.
Like say
But let's
on
say,
software,
yes, for
you
the
go from
sake of the
lowest to
argument,
highest.
let's do it though by software. Yes, they do. It's the order they are. So yeah, if you have presenting some data, especially if you have larger amount, and you just only really looking at the trend, not the exact value. So how did it change within this period of time? So here, you look at it. It tells you that. So you see most of them have positive trend, except this one, and mainly then this one and this one, these four. You notice they ended up going downward. Actually, you can even see from the color. So they're all green. So go from most recent to the oldest. They all ended up green, except these ended up in the red. So you can even see through the colors, or you can see the chart. So also the fact that it's red on top, red on bottom, you know that start low, went up, and went low again. Okay. So as I mentioned, the Sparklines, you have different options. You have win loss. I will give you those small column bars, positive and negative. 2 columns, lines. You can, if you don't use markers, you can put like first point and last point. There's different styles. You can change the color. Actually, you can change pretty much any. There's a lot of options to change the colors of each parameter of these. Change the color of the high point, the low point, first, last, so on. So even the column you have different color patterns. So it's fully customizable. Let's change this back to blue. Any question on this? Good. Hold on. Let's go back here. Is that music in the background? Good for them. I'm gonna go through forecast and trend functions, but we don't have much time left. We'll leave this till Wednesday. It's all out today, huh? No, only a few things we did. Review loop. We had the nested for Sparklines and scroll bar. That's it. Okay. Just